In that moment, in the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, with Manhattan glittering below like a sea of golden lights, Emily knew nothing would ever be the same. The city seemed to conspire with destiny, creating the perfect setting for two completely different worlds to collide in a silent explosion of possibilities. "I can't stop anymore," Michael whispered against her lips, and those 4 words sealed a fate neither of them could imagine. The air conditioning murmured discreetly in the background, but Emily barely noticed it. The only thing she could perceive was the contrast between the softness of his hands on her skin and the harshness of the world he represented. A world of board meetings, million-dollar contracts, and cold decisions she had never experienced from her small desk at the clinic in Greenwich Village. Michael's eyes, dark as the New York night stretching beyond the panoramic windows, reflected something Emily hadn't expected to find, an abyss of loneliness so deep it seemed capable of swallowing her whole. For an instant, she wondered if she could save herself from falling into it, or if it was already too late. Sometimes the most significant decisions of our lives are made in seconds, in breaths stolen between duty and desire, she thought as her fingers intertwined with his, noticing the differences. Her soft receptionist's hands against his firm and confident ones, accustomed to molding the world to his will. The jazz music playing on the high-fidelity sound system created an atmosphere of unreality, as if they were suspended in a temporal bubble where the rules of the outside world didn't apply. The champagne sparkled in the crystal flutes, still untouched. Emily had never tasted one so expensive, and wondered if it would taste different from the sparkling wine they drank at family celebrations in her small Lower East Side apartment. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his words barely a whisper against the backdrop of the city. "Yes," she answered with an honesty that surprised him. "But sometimes fear is just the price we pay for experiencing something extraordinary." Michael smiled, and for the first time that night, that smile didn't seem rehearsed. As he drew her closer, Emily felt something begin to change inside her, as if the tectonic plates supporting her existence were silently readjusting. The New York night observed them, a silent witness to an encounter that would change the course of 2 lives forever. Emily Wilson was 22 years old, and 3 characteristics defined her completely. A genuine innocence that made her see goodness where others saw opportunism, a silent determination inherited from her Southern grandmother that kept her standing firm even when the ground seemed to crumble, and a romantic sensitivity that led her to believe true love was worth any sacrifice. The tiny apartment she shared with her mother and 2 younger siblings in the Lower East Side smelled of last night's stew and the jasmine she grew in small pots on the fire escape. The morning light filtered through worn curtains as she prepared for another day of work at the clinic, carefully applying the little makeup she used, just a touch of gloss on her lips and mascara. The mirror reflected an image of large hazel eyes that seemed to harbor more questions than answers. Her chestnut curls cascaded over her shoulders, rebellious as always to any attempt to tame them. They carried the same indomitable spirit that ran through her veins. "Em, can I borrow your red lipstick? Mine's finished." Her sister Kate, 16, appeared at the shared bathroom door, already wearing her school uniform. "I'm not using it today, so go ahead," she smiled, handing her the small tube. "But don't overdo it. Mom already scolded you last time." Breakfast was a chaotic but loving gathering around the kitchen table. Her mother, Susan, prepared toast while reviewing everyone's schedules. At 45, after being abandoned by the children's father, she had raised this home single-handedly with her skills as a seamstress, specializing in theater costumes that she sold to small shops in the village. "What time do you finish today, honey?" she asked while serving coffee in mismatched cups. "At 6, if there are no last-minute emergencies," Emily replied, nibbling on a piece of buttered toast. What she didn't mention was that she had arranged to have coffee with Michael Parker after work. 3 weeks had passed since that chance meeting in the broken elevator, and 1 week since the night at the penthouse. 3 quick dates in between, each more intense than the last, had created a sort of parallel reality in her life that she still didn't know how to share with her family. 15 miles away, in a duplex penthouse with panoramic views of the city, Michael Parker was signing documents while his personal assistant recited the day's schedule. At 37, he was the perfect contrast to Emily. He had built a tech empire from scratch, transforming a small Brooklyn startup into a conglomerate valued at billions of dollars. The board will meet at 11. Marketing wants to present the new international campaign at 1. You have a reservation for lunch with the Japanese investors at Daniel at 2:30, enumerated Megan, his efficient assistant, while he merely nodded. Cancel the lunch, he said suddenly. I have another commitment. Megan raised an eyebrow, surprised. In 5 years working for him, Michael had never cancelled a meeting with investors. Something was changing, but she didn't dare ask what. When the assistant left, Michael approached the window. New York spread before him like a chessboard, where he had always known how to move the pieces to his advantage. The Italian suit fit his athletic body perfectly. The leather shoes shone immaculately. The Swiss watch on his wrist was worth more than Emily's entire apartment. Yet for the first time in years, none of this seemed to matter. He thought of her genuine laugh that hid no intentions, of how she had looked at his apartment with curiosity, but without the greed he usually detected in other women. He thought of the way she listened, truly listened when he spoke, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine a world where the orphan boy from the Bronx that he once was didn't need to hide behind bank accounts and corporate acquisitions. Perhaps the true luxury is authenticity, he murmured to himself, surprised by a thought so foreign to his usual philosophy. His phone vibrated with a message. Still on for today. I can bring pastries from my neighborhood bakery. They're the best in New York. Emily and her simplicity. Michael smiled as he hadn't done in a long time. Confirmed, but skip the pastries. I have a surprise for you, he replied. What he didn't write was that he had reserved a private jet to take her to dinner in Boston. Perhaps it was excessive. Perhaps it was his way of impressing, or perhaps, just perhaps, it was his way of showing the stars to someone who seemed to shine brighter than all of them put together. The restaurant on the Boston harbor seemed to float over the Atlantic. The soft lights reflected on the water, creating artificial constellations that competed with the stars. Emily observed everything with a mixture of wonder and bewilderment. Hours before, she had been answering phones at the clinic. Now she was dining at one of the most exclusive restaurants in America, after a flight on a private jet that had left her speechless. This is too much, she whispered, as the waiter served a wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Michael watched her, fascinated by each of her genuine reactions. He was used to people who feigned indifference to luxury, a false sophistication that intended to hide their amazement. Emily, on the contrary, wasn't afraid to show her astonishment, to admit that all this was new to her. Nothing is too much, he responded, taking her hand across the table. I want to show you my world. Why me? She asked suddenly, with a frankness that disarmed him. There are women much more suited for all this. The water gently lapped against the restaurant's pillars, creating a hypnotic rhythm that accompanied the conversation. Michael took a sip of wine, contemplating the question. Why her? Even he didn't fully understand. Because when I'm with you, I don't need to be Michael Parker, the businessman. I can be simply Michael, he finally confessed. And you don't know how long it's been since I've just been myself. Emily's eyes softened, seeing beyond the facade of the powerful man to find the lonely boy he once was. The restaurant's environment seemed to dissolve around them, and for a moment, they were just two people connecting on a level that went beyond circumstances or status. Tell me about the boy you were, she asked, leaning slightly forward. The real Michael. He never spoke about his past. It was an unwritten rule, a red line that no one in his circle dared cross. But with Emily's eyes fixed on his, the words began to flow almost against his will. I was born in the Bronx. My mother died when I was 5. My father, well, he disappeared shortly after. I grew up in an orphanage until I was 16. The words came out broken, as if each one represented a small act of courage. It wasn't a pleasant place. I learned that in this world, either you're the wolf or you're the prey. Emily listened without judging, her eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond sympathy. And you decided to be the wolf? She asked softly. I decided I would never be vulnerable again, he responded with an honesty that surprised even himself. At 18, I got a scholarship for computer science. At 22, I founded my first company. By 30, I was already a millionaire. And did that make you happy? The question hung between them, simple but devastating. Michael looked toward the horizon, where the sea merged with the night sky. "It made me secure," he finally answered. "Which isn't the same as happy, is it?" Emily gently shook her head. A comfortable silence settled between them, while the sea breeze played with the strands of her hair. "My father abandoned us too," she suddenly shared. "But I had my mother, my grandmother, my uncles. A safety net woven with love, not with money." Michael felt a pang of healthy envy. What would it have been like to grow up surrounded by unconditional love, without having to fight for every crumb of affection? "You know what my grandmother taught me," continued Emily, "that life isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. And that scars aren't for hiding, but to remind us that we are survivors." The waitress approached with the main courses, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When they were alone again, Michael found himself sharing more details of his childhood. The books he read in secret, his fascination with computers, the nights he dreamed of escaping. "I've never told anyone this," he admitted, surprised by his own openness. "Sometimes we need someone who listens without expecting anything in return," Emily replied, her voice mixing with the sound of the waves. As they dined, Michael observed each of her gestures, how she closed her eyes when tasting something delicious, how her expressive hands accompanied each story, how her laughter seemed to illuminate the entire place. And in each of these small moments, something inside him began to transform, subtly like the tide that changes the shape of the shore without our barely noticing. "People are like cities," reflected Emily, looking at Boston lit up in the distance. "We have main avenues that everyone can see, but also secret alleys where we keep our deepest truths." Michael nodded, thinking of all the dark alleys inside him, places no one had ever visited, until now. "And if my alleys are too dark?" he asked quietly. Emily took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, as if they had been made to meet. "Then we'll walk them together," she replied, with a certainty that made Michael's heart beat faster. "Because sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in the darkness." The night advanced, and with it, the sensation that something irrevocable was happening between them. Two completely opposite worlds began to orbit around each other, defying all laws of probability and common sense. What neither of them knew was that soon they would have to face obstacles much greater than their social differences, that Michael's past contained secrets that could destroy the fragile connection they were building, and that Emily's strength would be tested as never before. 2 months after that dinner in Boston, Emily's life seemed taken from a novel she never imagined starring in. The dinners at exclusive restaurants, the weekends in the Hamptons, the discreet but expensive jewelry that Michael gave her, all of it formed a strange contrast with her shifts at the clinic and the afternoons helping her mother with sewing. That Tuesday morning, while organizing the week's appointments at reception, she noticed a sudden nausea that forced her to run to the bathroom. It was the 3rd time that week. With trembling hands, she took the pregnancy test she had bought the day before, but hadn't dared to use from her purse. 5 minutes later, sitting on the floor of the small clinic bathroom with the antiseptic aroma surrounding her, Emily looked at the 2 pink lines that forever changed the course of her life. "I'm pregnant," she whispered to herself, the words resonating strangely on her lips. Fear and joy mixed in equal proportions, creating a cocktail of emotions she could barely process. How would Michael react? How would her family take the news? Were they really prepared for this? That same day, at the headquarters of Parker Technologies, Michael was reviewing the latest financial reports when Megan entered with a worried expression. "You have a visitor," announced his assistant. "Victoria Bennett. She says it's urgent." Michael visibly tensed. Victoria had been his fiancée 3 years ago before he abruptly broke off the engagement. The woman who entered his office was the living image of sophistication. 40 years old, former international model, now director of her own fashion brand in Los Angeles. "Victoria," Michael greeted, maintaining a prudent distance. "To what do I owe your visit?" She moved through the office as if she still had the right to occupy that space, her heels echoing against the polished marble. Her expensive perfume flooded the room, bringing back memories Michael had tried to bury. "I heard you have a new tea distraction," she commented, her eyes evaluating every corner of the office. "A girl from the Lower East Side. How quaint, Michael." The condescending tone made Michael's jaw tighten. "My personal life hasn't been your business for a long time, Victoria." She let out a cold, almost metallic laugh. I just come as a concerned friend. He will tire of you, just as he tired of me. When the novelty of your purity wears off, he'll seek another conquest." The insinuation was clear, and Michael felt something burning inside him. Was it guilt, anger, or the recognition that there was a pattern in his behavior that he himself refused to admit? "You don't know Emily," he responded dryly, "and you certainly don't know me anymore." Victoria approached him, her perfume enveloping him like an invisible net. "Does she know everything about you, Michael? About how you really built your empire? About the textile company in New Jersey? About us?" The mention of the textile company was like a punch to the stomach. One of the best-kept skeletons in his closet, a business he had acquired for a fraction of its value 7 years earlier, leaving dozens of workers without compensation. "You should leave," he said with a calmness he didn't feel. Victoria headed to the door, but before leaving she turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "By the way, did you know I was hospitalized for severe depression after our breakup? I suppose you haven't told your new conquest that either." The door closed behind her, leaving Michael with a bitter taste in his mouth. He looked out the panoramic window at New York, the city he had conquered with determination and sometimes questionable decisions. How would Emily react if she knew everything? If she saw not just the successful businessman, but also the predator he had sometimes been? His phone vibrated. It was a message from Emily. "Need to see you. It's important." Something in the tone of the message told him this wasn't a conversation to have over the phone. He responded immediately, "I'll pick you up at 7. Everything okay?" The reply took a while to come. "We just need to talk." That night in Michael's penthouse, New York stretched below them like a blanket of lights. Emily stood by the panoramic window, her silhouette cut against the night sky. She wore a simple dress, so different from the expensive clothes Victoria used to wear. "I'm pregnant," she said without preamble, turning to look at him directly. Michael stood motionless. Half all the things he expected to hear, that possibility hadn't even crossed his mind. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely audible. 3 different tests," she confirmed, "all positive." A dense silence settled between them, full of unformulated questions and unexpressed fears. Michael walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, which he drank in one gulp. "Say something, please," Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Michael left the glass and approached her. His face was unreadable, a perfect mask that hid the whirlwind of emotions he felt. Then, to Emily's surprise, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Marry me," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement loaded with raw emotion. Emily looked at him, astonished. "What?" "I want you to be my wife. I want us to form a family," he continued, his eyes more vulnerable than she had ever seen them. "Not because you're pregnant, but because I can't imagine my life without you." A solitary tear rolled down Emily's cheek. "Michael, we barely know each other. Everything is going too fast." He stood up, without letting go of her hands. "Life doesn't always give us the time we want, but what we need. And I know I need you, Emily Wilson." Emily's heart was beating so hard she feared he could hear it. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw herself into his arms and believe in fairy tales. But another part, the practical part inherited from her mother, warned her to be careful. "There are things you don't know about me," Michael suddenly said, as if he had read her thoughts. "Things that could change what you feel." Emily tensed. "What things?" Michael took a deep breath. "I've done things to get where I am. Things that weren't always ethical. We all make mistakes," she responded. "They're not simple mistakes, Emily. They're conscious decisions," he confessed, his voice hoarse. "I ruined companies, manipulated people, did what was necessary to survive, and then to win." The revelation hung between them, heavy as a slab. Emily released his hands and walked to the other end of the room, needing space to process what she had just heard. "Why are you telling me this now?" she finally asked. "Because if we're going to start a life together, I don't want secrets between us," he answered. "And because you deserve to know who you're really committing to." Emily looked at him, trying to reconcile the vulnerable man in front of her with the image of the ruthless businessman he was describing. "And the baby, what do you really want?" Michael crossed the space separating them. "I want to be the father I never had. I want to give you everything you deserve. I want to try to be better than I've been." Outside it began to rain. The drops hit against the panoramic windows, creating a symphony that accompanied the most crucial moment in both their lives. "I'm afraid," Emily admitted, her voice just a whisper. "So am I," he confessed, and that honesty, more than any grandiose promise, was what finally reached her heart. "Yes," she said at last, "I will marry you." Michael embraced her, lifting her slightly off the floor. When their lips met, the rain increased over New York, as if the sky wanted to mark with its tears that moment of decision. Neither of them knew that that night, as they sealed their commitment, they were also planting the seeds of trials and difficulties that would test every fiber of their love. That the complete truth about Michael still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge, and that the true journey, the most difficult one, was just beginning. The wedding was an intimate ceremony in a historic chapel from the 17th century in upstate New York. The October sky was clear, as if nature itself wanted to bless the union. Emily wore the wedding dress her grandmother had brought from Georgia in a leather suitcase, restored with care and love by her mother's expert hands, complemented with a wildflower arrangement that had been passed down for generations. What most surprised everyone was Michael's choice. Instead of the Italian suit everyone expected, he wore the same simple suit that his father, a worker who left when he was very young, had worn at his own wedding decades earlier. A choice that made him cry for the first time in front of Emily when he showed it to her the night before. "It was the only thing I kept of him," he had explained, his voice breaking. "I don't even remember his face well. But this suit, it's as if a part of him could be present tomorrow." Emily's family received Michael with a mixture of distrust and hope. Her mother, Susan, had looked at the diamond ring that could buy a whole house and had asked in her marked southern accent, "Does he love you or possess you?" The question had echoed in Emily's mind like the bells of St. Patrick's Cathedral that never ceased to ring. Now, during the reception at a nearby farm, Emily observed Michael animatedly conversing with her uncle Robert, a retired taxi driver who told anecdotes of New York in the 80s. There was something genuinely moving in seeing how her husband, the word still sounded strange in her mind, was making an effort to fit into a world so different from his own. "He seems like a good man," said her grandmother Rose, approaching with the help of her cane. At 83, she maintained a lucidity and intuition that impressed everyone. "He has deep wounds, but also has heart." "How do you know, Grandma?" asked Emily, watching Michael laugh with a naturalness he rarely showed in his business environment. "The eyes never lie, child," replied the elderly woman, "and his look at you as if you were the sun after a lifetime of storms." The honeymoon in Martha's Vineyard was a parenthesis of pure happiness. Days of walks along the shore, nights of seafood in waterfront restaurants, dawns of confidences and caresses under the linen sheets of the beachfront hotel. Michael seemed like a different man, relaxed, playful, capable of enjoying the small pleasures without the constant tension that characterized him in New York. "We could stay here forever," he suggested one afternoon as they contemplated the sunset from the porch of their rented cottage. "Buy a house, raise the baby away from all the noise." "And your company?" asked Emily, intertwining her fingers with his. A shadow crossed Michael's face. "Sometimes I think I've become a prisoner of what I built." But the bubble of happiness burst abruptly when they returned to New York. One afternoon, while Michael was in a meeting, Emily decided to organize some documents in the office of their new home, a penthouse in the Upper East Side that Michael had bought as a wedding present. Among invoices and contracts, she found an old folder simply labeled NJ Textiles Inc. Curiosity got the better of prudence. Upon opening the folder, she found archived court documents from 7 years earlier. With each page she read, her heart sank deeper. The case involved the bankruptcy of a family textile company in New Jersey that Michael had bought for a fraction of its value, leaving dozens of workers without compensation. Names, faces, testimonies, entire families that had been left destitute while Michael acquired the machinery and patents for pennies on the dollar. Impeccable but ethically questionable legal strategies. A master chess move in business where the pawns had been sacrificed without contemplation. Emily's hands trembled when she closed the folder. Her mind evoked the stories that her Uncle John, a lifelong union member, told about unscrupulous businessmen. Stories she had always listened to with indignation. How could she love a man whose fortune had been built in part on the suffering of others? That night she waited for Michael to return. New York had unleashed a furious storm, as if the sky wanted to accompany the tempest brewing inside her. The sound of the rain against the panoramic windows seemed to drum accusations. When he entered, soaked and with a tired expression, Emily was standing by the fireplace, the folder in her hands. Michael stopped short when he recognized it. "Why?" she asked simply. There was no accusation in her voice, just a deep sadness that was almost worse. Michael dropped his briefcase and took off his wet jacket. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to deny, to justify himself, to construct one of those elaborate defenses he knew so well how to articulate. But then his shoulders slumped, as if he finally yielded to a weight he had carried for too long. "Because I was afraid," he confessed, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Because I believed that in this world only the strong survive. Because I convinced myself it was the price I had to pay." Emily observed him, trying to reconcile the vulnerable man before her with the ruthless strategist who had ruined so many lives. "I told you about my childhood," he continued, approaching slowly. "But I didn't tell you everything. I didn't say that in the orphanage I learned that the weak are victims and the strong are victimizers. That I swore never to be vulnerable again, never to go hungry again, never to depend on the charity of others." The rain increased, creating a dramatic backdrop to his words. "I became the monster I swore I'd never be," he admitted, and those words carried the weight of a repentance that couldn't be feigned. Emily left the folder on the table and walked to the window. The city under the storm looked distorted, as if it were a metaphor for how her life felt at that moment, blurred, uncertain, threatening. "My family has always been on the other side of that system, Michael," she finally said. "We're the ones who suffer when the powerful make decisions like the ones you made. My Uncle John lost his job in a factory that closed after being acquired by a conglomerate. My cousin Peter had to emigrate when the construction company where he worked was sold to foreign investors." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with contained tears. "How can I share my life, raise our child, with someone capable of causing so much conscious harm?" Michael approached but stopped a step away, respecting the space she seemed to need. "I can't change what I did," he said with a hoarse voice, "but I can choose to be different now. I can try to repair the damage, compensate those people, use my position for something more than accumulating power." A lightning bolt illuminated the room, projecting dramatic shadows over their faces. In that brief instant of intense light, Emily saw something in Michael's eyes she had never noticed before. A crack in the armor, a glimpse of the frightened boy he once was. "How do I know these aren't just words?" she asked, her voice involuntarily softening. Michael extended his hand, an offer of connection that left the decision completely in her hands. "You don't. You'll have to see it in my actions day by day. And if you ever feel I'm failing, that I'm becoming that man again, promise me you'll tell me, that you won't let me lose myself again." Emily looked at the extended hand, then at his eyes, then back at his hand. In that moment, the baby moved inside her for the first time, a small flutter, barely perceptible but undeniable. As if the new life growing inside her wanted to participate in this crucial decision. Slowly she took his hand. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was a truce, an opportunity, an act of faith in the possibility of redemption. "It won't be easy," she warned. "Nothing worth having ever is," he replied, gently drawing her to him. As he embraced her, Michael understood that this was the true turning point in his life. Not the millions accumulated, not the buildings constructed, not the companies acquired, but this moment of absolute vulnerability, where he had finally dropped all his defenses before the only person who could see through them. The storm continued to rage over New York, but inside the penthouse something was beginning to heal. A slow process, sometimes painful, but necessary. The path to redemption had just begun, and it would be the most difficult challenge that Michael Parker would ever face. The following 6 months marked a period of profound changes. Emily's belly grew, evidencing the new life flourishing inside her, but the emotional distance between her and Michael also grew. It wasn't a hostile estrangement, but rather a silent rethinking of who they were and what they really wanted. Emily had resigned from her job at the clinic in the 5th month of pregnancy, when the hours standing became too exhausting. With free time on her hands and a growing moral disquiet after discovering the truth about Michael's empire, She sought something that would give meaning to her days. She found it unexpectedly when she accompanied her Uncle John to a meeting of the Lower East Side Neighborhood Association. The location, an old workshop converted into a community center, overflowed with people of all ages and backgrounds. Retired Americans, immigrant families, young activists. The central theme was the threat of eviction facing several families in the neighborhood after the building was purchased by a foreign real estate company. "We need someone who knows how to talk to institutions, who can draft legal appeals," explained Teresa, a retired teacher who coordinated the group. Something stirred inside Emily. Before realizing it, she had raised her hand and offered her help. She didn't mention that she was the wife of one of the most powerful businessmen in New York. She didn't mention that she lived in a luxury penthouse on the Upper East Side. She only said she had free time and wanted to help. In the following weeks, Emily discovered a facet of herself she didn't know existed. She had a natural talent for mediating conflicts, for finding creative solutions, for giving voice to the forgotten. She spent mornings at the community center, organizing documentation, contacting pro bono lawyers, listening to stories of people who saw their homes in danger. On one of those mornings, while helping the Johnson family complete an appeal against their eviction, Emily realized a bitter irony. Many of these people were victims of corporate practices, very similar to those Michael had employed to build his fortune. The personal obstacle was becoming increasingly evident. The more she found herself in this volunteer work, the further she moved away from the world of luxury and privilege that Michael represented. For his part, Michael faced his own dilemmas. Emily's words had penetrated deeply, awakening a conscience he had kept dormant for years. He began to review his company's practices, to question decisions he would have previously made without blinking, to ask not only is it legal but also is it just. These changes didn't go unnoticed in business circles. Rumors spread. Michael Parker was softening, losing his edge. His company's shares fluctuated with each decision that prioritized ethics over immediate profit. One spring afternoon, Emily returned to the penthouse to find Michael sitting on the terrace, contemplating the city with a worried expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, leaving her bag by the door. Michael looked at her, noticing the spark in her eyes that appeared each time she returned from her community activities. A spark he hadn't seen when she was with him for a long time. "The board is questioning my leadership," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "They think I'm making sentimental decisions, that I'm compromising the company's profitability." Emily sat across from him, her 7-month belly becoming a physical presence between them. "And what do you think?" Michael looked at her for a long time before answering. "I think they were right about one thing. I've changed, but I'm not sure it's for the worse." A small smile formed on Emily's lips. "Change is rarely comfortable, but it's necessary," he completed. Then, as if changing the subject, "How's your work at the association going?" Emily's face lit up as she told him about the progress with the families threatened with eviction, how they had secured a moratorium, how they were negotiating with the city council. "You should have studied law," Michael observed. "You have a natural talent for it." "It's never too late," she replied, caressing her belly. "Maybe when the baby is a bit older." The conversation drifted to plans for the baby's room, a comfortable neutrality that avoided the deeper issues floating between them like storm clouds. But both knew they were only postponing the inevitable. Their paths, which had converged so improbably, were beginning to take divergent directions. That night, while Emily slept, Michael remained in his office, reviewing old documents. Among them, he found the dossier of NJ Textiles, Inc., the New Jersey textile company he had acquired years ago. With a lump in his throat, he reviewed the list of dismissed workers, their names and circumstances, data that before had been mere statistics in a financial report. James Foster, 54 years old, 30 years in the company, 3 children, 1 with a disability. Mary Thompson, 48 years old, widow, sole support of her family. John Davis, 33 years old, had just bought his first house with a mortgage. The list continued, each name a life disrupted by decisions he had made from the coldness of an elegant office. With trembling fingers, Michael began to write an email to his financial director. "I need to locate these people, all of them. I want to establish a compensation fund." It was past midnight when he finished. As he looked up, he was startled to see Emily at the door, observing him. "How long have you been there?" he asked. "Long enough," she replied softly. approaching to read the screen over his shoulder. Her eyes widened as she understood what he was doing. "It won't bring back the lost time," warned Michael. "It won't repair all the damage, but it's a start, isn't it?" Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than a start." For the first time in weeks, they shared a moment of authentic connection. It wasn't the overflowing passion of the early days, but something deeper, the mutual recognition of two people who were evolving, sometimes together, sometimes separately, but always in search of something better. What neither of them could foresee was that external forces were about to test this fragile reconciliation. Michael's ex-fiancée hadn't had her final say, and New York's business circles don't easily forgive those who challenge their unwritten rules. The perfect storm was forming on the horizon, ready to sweep away everything in its path. The news broke like a bomb on a placid June morning. Emily was preparing a cup of herbal tea in the kitchen, one hand supporting her back to relieve the weight of her 8-month pregnancy, when Michael entered with a distraught face holding his tablet. "What's happened?" she asked, alarmed by his expression. Without saying a word, Michael showed her the screen. The headline of the Wall Street Journal left no room for doubt. IRS investigating Michael Parker for alleged tax evasion. Parker Technologies under suspicion. Emily sank into a chair, feeling the floor crumbling beneath her feet. "Is it true?" Michael vehemently denied it. "I've made many mistakes, Emily, but not this one. Someone is trying to bring me down." The following days were a whirlwind. The company's shares plummeted. The phones didn't stop ringing. Journalists, business partners, lawyers. Michael's law firm worked tirelessly to prove his innocence, but the media damage was already done. The headlines in the New York Times and the Washington Post were merciless. The friends from Michael's social circle disappeared like smoke. Even some members of his company's board began to distance themselves publicly. One afternoon, while Michael was meeting with his lawyers, the penthouse doorbell rang. Emily, who had decided not to go out to avoid the paparazzi posted at the building entrance, opened the door cautiously. Before her stood Victoria Bennett, Michael's ex-fiancée, impeccably dressed and with an indecipherable expression. "Emily Wilson," she greeted coldly. "I think it's time we had a woman-to-woman conversation." Reluctantly, Emily invited her in. Both women sat in the living room, the contrast between them almost comical. Victoria in her designer suit, perfect makeup, and discreet but expensive jewelry. Emily in a simple maternity dress, face free of makeup, and only her wedding band as adornment. "I suppose you know I'm behind the investigation," Victoria said without preamble. Emily looked at her, astonished. "You? But why?" Victoria elegantly crossed her legs. "Revenge, you could say. Though I prefer to call it poetic justice. Michael left me when I needed him most, when I was at the depths of my depression. He promised me a future, and then ripped it away." "That doesn't justify destroying his life," Emily responded protectively. "His life?" Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "His empire, you mean? Because that's the only thing that really matters to him. Everything else, you, that baby, are just more acquisitions in his portfolio." The words hit Emily like a whip, awakening insecurities she had tried to silence for months. "You know nothing about our relationship." Victoria leaned forward. "I know more than you think. I know you found the documents about NJ Textiles. I know you've been helping families at risk of eviction, precisely the kind of situations that companies like Michael's create. I know you're trapped between the love you feel for him and everything he represents." Emily paled. How could she know all this? As if reading her mind, Victoria explained, "New York is a small city when it comes to circles of power, and I never stopped watching him. By the way, the tax investigation is completely legitimate. My sources at the IRS confirmed irregularities in the corporate declarations." Before Emily could respond, the penthouse door opened and Michael entered, stopping abruptly when he saw the two women. "What are you doing here?" he asked with an icy voice, addressing Victoria. Victoria rose with feline elegance. "Just stopping by to congratulate the mom-to-be," she replied with false sweetness. "And to remind you, dear Michael, that karma always finds its way." With those words, she left the apartment, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and palpable tension. "What did she say?" Michael demanded to know as soon as the door closed. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to see through all the layers that constituted the man she had chosen as her life partner. She told me she's behind the tax investigation, and that the accusations are true. Michael sank into the sofa, the mask of control vanishing to reveal a profound exhaustion. Not everything is true, but there are grey areas, transactions that my tax advisors structured in tax havens. I signed the documents without questioning too much. So you did something illegal? Emily's voice trembled. Not directly. But I didn't do what was right either, he admitted, running his hands over his face. The lawyers say we can reach an agreement with the IRS, pay a fine, avoid criminal charges. But the company's reputation, that can't be fixed. Emily approached the window, observing New York spreading below them, the city that had once united them and now seemed to be separating them. What are we going to do? Michael looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting a renewed determination. I'm going to fight, not for the empire, but for us, for the baby, for the person I'm trying to be. That night, while Emily slept uneasily, Michael made the most difficult decision of his life. The next morning, he convened the board of directors of Parker Technologies and presented his resignation as CEO. He proposed a restructuring plan that included full cooperation with the IRS, the implementation of new ethical and social responsibility policies, and the appointment of a successor with values aligned with this new vision. The news spread like wildfire. The resignation of the powerful Michael Parker made the headlines of every newspaper. Some interpreted it as an admission of guilt, others as an act of corporate responsibility. For Michael, it was simply the first step toward freedom. When he returned to the penthouse that afternoon, he found Emily packing. "What are you doing?" he asked, confused. She turned, silent tears running down her cheeks. "We have to leave, Michael. This place, this life, it's not ours anymore." He approached slowly. "What do you mean?" "That if you really want to change, if you really want to be the man you say, we can't continue living in this bubble of privilege," she explained with a broken but determined voice. "We need to start again from scratch, without the weight of all this." Michael looked around at the luxurious penthouse that had once represented the pinnacle of his success. Now it seemed empty to him, a mausoleum of misguided values and distorted priorities. "Where would we go?" he asked softly. "To the Lower East Side," she replied, wiping away her tears. "My mother has space for us while we find something of our own, something more authentic." In that moment, Michael understood the magnitude of the change that was coming. It wasn't just about leaving a job or an apartment. It was about renouncing an identity he had meticulously constructed over years. It was about jumping into the void without a safety net, trusting only that love, that feeling he had previously considered a weakness, would be enough to sustain them. "All right," he said finally. "Let's pack the essentials and leave the rest behind." That night, as the most valuable possessions were confiscated as part of the investigation, Michael and Emily left the penthouse with just 2 suitcases. The descent in the elevator from the top floor to the ground floor seemed symbolic. A man who had had everything now descended to the reality that the rest of the world inhabited. As they left the building, a group of journalists was waiting for them. Flashes, shouted questions, microphones pushed in their faces. Michael instinctively placed himself in front of Emily, protecting her with his body as they advanced toward the taxi that awaited them. "Is it true that you're bankrupt, Mr. Parker? Are you facing criminal charges? Where will you hide now?" The questions rained down on them like poisoned darts. Finally, when they were about to enter the taxi, Michael stopped and turned to the journalists. "I'm not hiding," he said with a clear and firm voice. "I'm starting over, and for the first time in my life I'm doing it with clean hands." With those words, he helped Emily into the vehicle and closed the door behind them. As the taxi drove away, Emily rested her head on Michael's shoulder. Outside, Manhattan lit up with the first lights of dusk. "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper. Michael took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers as he had done on the first night. "So am I," he confessed. "But for the first time, it's the right kind of fear." The taxi advanced toward the Lower East Side, toward a life that neither of them could fully imagine. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of authentic possibilities. And in that precise moment, despite all they had lost, Emily knew they were gaining something infinitely more valuable, the opportunity to build a life based on truth. Susan Wilson's apartment in the Lower East Side seemed to shrink with Michael's presence. His nearly 6'4" frame bumped against the low door frames. His shoulders barely passed through the narrow hallway that led to the small bedroom he now shared with Emily. The bathroom, with its shower where barely one person fit, had become a daily challenge. For someone accustomed to 3,000-square-foot penthouses and Italian marble bathrooms, the transition was brutal. Nevertheless, Michael didn't complain. There was something in the authenticity of that home that disarmed him. The family photographs on the walls, the smell of stew that permeated every corner, the laughter of Kate and James, Emily's siblings, resonating in the afternoons. "More pot roast, Michael?" Susan offered during dinner, her southern accent becoming more pronounced when she was at home. "Thank you, it's delicious," he responded sincerely, extending his plate. Susan observed him with a mixture of compassion and caution. She had seen in the news how her son-in-law's empire crumbled, how his name was dragged through the mud, how his company's shares had lost almost 80% of their value. She had also seen how, despite everything, he treated her daughter with affection and respect that no money could buy. "I have an interview tomorrow," Michael announced, changing the subject. "At Frank's auto repair shop, your Uncle Robert's friend." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The powerful Michael Parker, whose signature had been on multi-million-dollar contracts, was now looking for work as a mechanic. "Do you know anything about cars?" asked James, 17, breaking the silence. "My father was a mechanic," Michael replied, his voice softening as he spoke of a past he rarely mentioned. "Before he left. I remember some things he taught me when I was very young." Emily looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he had mentioned his father's profession. Another small piece of the puzzle that was her husband, a man she continued to discover day by day. The interview was a disaster. Michael's hands, accustomed to signing documents and holding crystal glasses, proved clumsy among tools and engines. Frank, a frank 50-year-old man with arms covered in worn tattoos, observed him with a mixture of amusement and pity. "Look, Parker, I respect that you want to work," he said finally, wiping the oil from his hands with a rag. "But you don't know anything about cars. You'd hurt yourself on the first day." Michael nodded, swallowing his pride. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity. Although," continued Frank, scratching his beard, "I need someone to handle the accounts. My niece who did it moved to Chicago last month. Do you know anything about accounting?" A bitter smile crossed Michael's face. If he knew that he had directed a company valued at billions of dollars. "Yes, I know a bit about numbers." Thus began his new professional life, in a small office at the back of the shop, organizing invoices, managing payments to suppliers, optimizing the business's expenses. The salary was a tiny fraction of what he had earned before, but it had something he hadn't felt in a long time, the satisfaction of earning his bread honestly, without complex schemes or gray areas. Meanwhile, Emily faced her own challenges. The birth was approaching, and the idea of bringing a new life into such a precarious situation frightened her. They had lost almost everything: the house, the cars, the bank accounts frozen during the investigation. The only thing they had managed to save was some personal jewelry and a modest account that Michael had kept separate from his businesses. One afternoon, while reviewing offers for affordable apartments to rent, Emily received a call that would change everything. It was Patricia, a lawyer from the neighborhood association where she had been collaborating before the scandal. "Emily, I need to see you. It's important." The urgency in her voice was palpable. They met at a coffee shop near Tompkins Square Park. Patricia, a 40-year-old woman with inexhaustible energy, went straight to the point. "The United Neighborhoods Foundation is looking for a coordinator for their legal advisory program for vulnerable families," she explained, pushing a brochure toward her. "I immediately thought of you." Emily looked at the brochure with disbelief. "Patricia, I'm about to give birth. My life is chaos at this moment. And I'm not a lawyer, you know that." Patricia smiled. "They don't need a lawyer. They need someone who knows how to coordinate, who has empathy, who knows the real needs of people. Besides," she made a significant pause, "the position includes a small apartment in the Foundation's building for the coordinator and their family." Emily's heart leaped. A job with purpose and a roof of their own. It seemed too good to be true. "Doesn't my situation worry you?" she asked, referring to the scandal surrounding her husband. "My last name is now Parker." Patricia leaned over the table. "Precisely why I want you for the position. Who better than someone who has seen both sides of the coin? Besides, we all deserve a second chance, don't you think?" That night, Emily told Michael about the offer. They were sitting on the small fire escape of the apartment, the stars barely visible among the city lights, and the neighbors hanging laundry. "You should accept it," he said immediately. "It's perfect for you. And you? The apartment is in the Bronx. You'd be far from the auto shop." Michael smiled, caressing her cheek. "I'll take the subway. Like the rest of the mortals." There was a lightness in his voice that contrasted with the gravity of their situation, as if the loss of his entire material empire had taken a weight off his shoulders rather than adding to it. "Don't you miss it?" Emily suddenly asked. "Your previous life?" Michael looked at the city, thoughtful. "I miss the security," he finally admitted. "The certainty that I could solve any problem with money. But I don't miss the person I was. I don't miss living in fear of losing everything, because now that I've lost it, I realize that what's truly important is still here." He took Emily's hand and placed it first on his heart, then on her belly, where their daughter was growing. The moment of intimacy was interrupted by a shout from inside. "Come see this," James called from the living room. They entered to find the whole family gathered around the small television. On the screen, Victoria Bennett was giving an exclusive to a well-known television program. "Michael Parker not only evaded taxes," she was saying with a measured voice, perfectly made up for the cameras, "he also manipulated his employees, deceived his partners, and betrayed everyone who trusted him." Michael stood motionless, watching as his ex-fiancée dug up every error, every transgression, every moment of weakness from his past. Some accusations were true, others malicious exaggerations, some simple lies, but all combined painted the portrait of a monster without scruples. "Turn it off, please," Susan asked, seeing her son-in-law's pale face, but Michael raised a hand. "No, I need to hear this." The interview continued, each word like a nail in his already tarnished reputation. Victoria spoke with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of an executioner, dissecting Michael's career with intimate knowledge of his most vulnerable points. When it finally ended, a thick silence filled the small living room. "None of that matters," Emily finally said, taking his hand. "That person she's talking about isn't who I have beside me now." Michael squeezed her hand, grateful, but she could feel the tremor in his fingers, the tension in his jaw. The blow had been devastating, not because he cared about public opinion, but because it confirmed his own deepest fears, that perhaps he was, irreversibly, the monster he had allowed to form inside him. That night, while Emily slept, Michael quietly slipped out of the apartment. He walked aimlessly through the streets of New York, the city he had once believed he conquered. His steps led him unconsciously to the Bronx, to the ruins of the orphanage where he had grown up, now an abandoned building waiting to be demolished. He stopped in front of the peeling facade, looking at the broken windows, the sealed doors. This was the true starting point, where everything began, where a frightened boy swore he would never be vulnerable again, never depend on the charity of others, never feel the pain of abandonment. "And look where that fear has led you," he murmured to himself. The irony didn't escape him. In his desperate attempt to never be vulnerable again, he had built a fortress so high it didn't let in the light. And now, when that fortress had crumbled, he discovered that true strength wasn't in the walls we build, but in the capacity to remain standing among the ruins. With that revelation, Michael began the long walk back to the Lower East Side, to Emily, to the imperfect but authentic life they were building among the rubble of his past. The baby was born on a winter dawn when the first rays of sun painted the New York sky pink and orange. It was a girl with Emily's eyes and Michael's stubborn determination. They named her Hope, a name that encapsulated everything they felt at that moment in their lives, the promise of a new beginning, of a different future, of redemption. At New York Presbyterian Hospital, without private rooms or imported flowers, only with the presence of Emily's family singing Southern lullabies, Michael held his daughter for the first time and cried as he had never done before. Grandmother Susan brought apple pie and coffee, and the whole room smelled of cinnamon and sugar. "She's perfect," he whispered, as little Hope grabbed his finger with surprising strength. Emily observed him from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "She looks like you when she frowns." Michael laughed through tears. "Poor girl. Let's hope she's inherited everything else from you." The family took turns to enter and meet the new member. Kate and James argued about who she resembled more. Uncle Robert was already planning to take her to see the Yankees play when she was old enough. Grandmother Rose, who had come specially from Georgia, blessed her with a prayer in a low voice, a family tradition that went back generations. Amid that loving chaos, Michael experienced an emotion he had never felt, a mixture of pride, terror, and a love so intense it almost physically hurt. Holding that small, defenseless creature, he finally understood what it meant to be truly vulnerable. And instead of terrifying him, this time it filled him with a strange peace. The first days with Hope in the small apartment that the Foundation had provided were a whirlwind of emotions. Sleepless nights, discussions about diapers, moments of pure joy when the baby smiled, instances of panic when she cried inconsolably. Michael adapted with a naturalness that surprised everyone, especially himself. His hands, which once signed million-dollar contracts, now changed diapers with dexterity. His voice, which once gave orders in boardrooms, now sang off-key lullabies at 3 in the morning. Emily began working at the Foundation when Hope was 2 months old. Michael adjusted his schedule at the auto shop to be able to care for the girl during the afternoons. They took turns, supported each other, improvised solutions to the small and large problems that arose each day. But despite the joy that Hope had brought to their lives, Michael struggled with internal demons that refused to disappear. Victoria's interview had been just the beginning. The tax investigations continued, and although it seemed he would avoid criminal charges thanks to an agreement with the IRS, his name remained synonymous with scandal in business circles. One morning, while having breakfast in the small kitchen of the apartment, Emily noticed Michael's distant expression as he read something on his phone. "What is it?" she asked while breastfeeding Hope. Michael hesitated before answering. "They just published an article on the fallen of finance. Guess who tops the list?" Emily sighed. "It will pass, Michael. People forget. It's not just that," he confessed, leaving the phone on the table. "I received an offer. From my former partners." Emily stopped feeding the baby, suddenly tense. "What kind of offer?" $15 million, he responded, his voice neutral. "In exchange for testifying against various corrupt executives, clearing my name, and potentially rebuilding everything." The silence that followed was dense, almost tangible. Hope, sensing the tension, began to whimper. "And what are you going to do?" Emily finally asked, resuming feeding the child, avoiding looking directly at Michael. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he had begun to show more frequently since they lived in the Bronx. "I don't know. It seems an opportunity to fix all this." "Fix what exactly?" Emily's voice was soft but loaded with meaning. "Our economic situation? Your reputation? Or do you miss your old life more than you admit?" The question hung between them, uncomfortable but necessary. Michael stood up and approached the window, observing the modest panorama of the Bronx, so different from the views he once had from his penthouse. "If you accept this," Emily finally said, cradling Hope against her chest, "you'll be betraying the person you've become these last few months. The man I love isn't the millionaire. It's the man who fixes cars and comes home tired, but with truly clean hands." The words hit him harder than any media accusation, because deep down, Michael knew they touched on the deepest truth of his transformation. It wasn't just about losing a fortune, but about finding an authentic identity that money had hidden for years. "Give me time to think," he asked, kissing Emily's forehead before leaving for the auto shop. The next 3 days were torment for Michael. He couldn't sleep, barely ate. He spent hours walking the streets of New York, returning to the abandoned orphanage in the Bronx where he grew up, sitting on the benches of St. Patrick's Cathedral where he married Emily. The weight of the decision was physical, palpable, suffocating. One afternoon he found himself in Central Park, observing families during their Sunday walk, parents playing with their children, grandparents telling stories, mothers sharing snacks. Everyday scenes that he would have previously found banal, but that now contained a wisdom that had escaped him throughout his life. What kind of father did he want to be for Hope? What lessons did he want to teach her? That success was measured in dollars and properties, or that true wealth was in integrity, in authenticity, in the ability to look others in the eye without shame? The answer came with a clarity that surprised him. It wasn't the one he would have expected months ago, but it was the only one that now made sense. That night he returned to the apartment later than usual. Emily was sitting on the small balcony, Hope sleeping in her arms. She looked at him expectantly, perceiving that something had changed in him. "I've made a decision," Michael announced, sitting across from her. Emily nodded, preparing herself for any response. "I'm listening. I'm going to refuse the money," he said, and as he pronounced the words he felt as if he was freeing himself from an invisible weight he had carried all his life. "But I'm going to do something more." He explained his plan. He would use all the knowledge he had about the corporation's illegal practices to create a detailed dossier that he would anonymously deliver to the authorities. Not out of revenge, but for justice. Not for personal benefit, but because it was right. "It will be my last action related to that world," he concluded. "After that, I just want to be Michael, Hope's father, your partner, the accountant of an auto shop who dreams of something better for his family." Emily looked at him for a long time, searching in his eyes for any sign of doubt or regret. She found none. In their place, she saw a serenity that had never been there before. "I'm proud of you," she finally said, taking his hand. "And Hope will be too when she's older and we tell her our story." Michael kissed the little head of his sleeping daughter, then Emily's lips. In that simple gesture was the promise of a different future, built not on the shifting sands of excessive ambition, but on the firm rock of values that truly mattered. The deep doubt that had corroded his soul for months finally dissipated. He didn't know exactly what the future held for them, but for the first time in his life he was at peace with the uncertainty, because some things were certain. The love he felt for his family, the commitment to his new life, the determination to be better today than yesterday. And for now, that was enough. A year had passed since that first night on Fifth Avenue. 12 months that seemed to contain several lives. The vertiginous romance, the hasty marriage, the financial scandal, Hope's birth, the reconstruction from zero in the Bronx. Now they lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood in Queens, with a small yard where Emily planted tomatoes, basil, and rosemary. Michael worked at the auto shop during the day, and in the evenings was starting a social project to teach orphaned youth about mechanics and ethical entrepreneurship. Emily had returned to studying, taking online labor law courses while the baby slept, dreaming of defending those who had been harmed by businessmen like Michael had been. Sunday afternoons were sacred. The entire family gathered at Susan's house for the family meal, a table full of fried chicken, potato salad, cornbread, and the apple pie that Grandmother Rose insisted on making, despite her trembling, arthritic hands. The sound of Uncle Robert's guitar filled the room, and Michael, who had once frequented Michelin-starred restaurants, discovered that the best flavor in the world was that of his mother-in-law's homemade pudding, served with love on mismatched plates. Life had found a rhythm, a comfortable routine that, though modest, contained a richness that money could never buy. Michael had discovered a satisfaction in the small daily victories that he never found in the great corporate acquisitions. However, the past is never completely buried. One spring morning, while Michael worked at the shop, a man in a suit appeared asking for him. It was Thomas Harris, his former financial director at Parker Technologies. "So you look good, Michael," greeted Thomas, observing with curiosity the environment of the shop, so different from the corporate offices where they used to meet. "What brings you here?" asked Michael, cleaning his grease-stained hands on a rag. "I come to offer an opportunity," replied the visitor, lowering his voice. "The board has decided they want you back." Michael looked at him incredulously. "Back? After everything that happened?" Thomas smiled. "The scandal has passed, Michael. The company survived, but it's not thriving. No one has your vision, your instinct. They want you back as a strategic consultant with a generous compensation package and preferential shares." The offer hung between them, tempting like a mirage in the desert. The opportunity to return to the world he once dominated, but this time on different terms. Without the pressure of being the CEO, without the ambiguous ethical commitments, just his talent put at the service of business strategy. "And Victoria, she's still a shareholder, isn't she?" asked Michael, remembering the woman who had triggered his downfall. "Victoria sold her shares 6 months ago. She moved to Los Angeles," explained Thomas. "The path is clear, Michael. "It's your moment of vindication." Michael asked for time to think. He promised to give an answer in a week. When Thomas left, he stood looking at his grease-stained hands, thinking about how they would feel holding a Mont Blanc pen again to sign million-dollar contracts. That night, he shared the offer with Emily while they bathed Hope together, now a cheerful 9-month-old girl who splashed happily in the small bathtub. "What are you going to do?" asked Emily, trying to maintain a neutral tone but unable to completely hide her concern. Michael observed his daughter, her chubby little hands beating the water, her bright eyes fixed on him with absolute trust. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's tempting. We could give Hope a more comfortable life, better opportunities." "She already has the best opportunities," Emily softly replied. "She has parents who love her, an extended family that adores her, a home full of authentic values. What else does she really need?" The question hung between them, along with the bath steam and the girls' bubbling laughter. The following days were ones of deep reflection for Michael. The offer was economically irresistible and professionally validating. It would be easy to justify it as for the good of the family, as an opportunity to better provide for Hope. But deep down, he knew it was his own ego that felt flattered, his old self that yearned to return to the circles of power. One afternoon, while working at the shop, he received an unexpected visit. Steve Davis, one of the workers dismissed from NJ Textiles, the New Jersey textile company that Michael had acquired years ago, leaving dozens of employees without compensation. "Parker," the man greeted, without extending his hand. "I came because I need to ask you something face to face." Michael felt his stomach contract. Revenge? Recriminations? Anything would have been understandable. "The compensation fund you created for the former employees, was it sincere or just a maneuver to clean your image?" asked Steve, his eyes fixed on Michael's. The fund had been one of the last actions Michael had taken before losing everything. He had allocated a substantial part of his personal savings to compensate, albeit partially, the workers affected by his aggressive business practices. "It was sincere," Michael responded, holding his gaze, "although I know it came late and doesn't repair all the damage caused." Steve nodded slowly. "My daughter was able to finish her studies thanks to that. My wife received the treatment she needed. I can't say I completely forgive you, but I wanted you to know it made a difference." He then extended his hand, a gesture of truce more than full reconciliation. Michael shook it, feeling the weight and strength of years of hard work in those calloused fingers. "I heard the company wants you back," added Steve before leaving. "I just came to see what kind of man you are now, before deciding if it's worth fighting against your return." Steve's visit was like a mirror reflecting the true nature of the decision Michael was facing. It wasn't just about a job or a salary. It was a choice about the man he wanted to be, about the legacy he wished to leave, about the example he wanted to set for his daughter. That night, while Emily and Hope slept, Michael went out to the small backyard. The New York sky was exceptionally clear, allowing some stars to be seen despite the city's light pollution. He sat in a cheap plastic chair, so different from the luxurious designer furniture he once owned, and contemplated the firmament. He thought about the frightened orphan boy, the ambitious young man who built an empire, the fallen man who had lost everything except the essentials. He thought about the faces of the people he had hurt with his decisions, and the faces of those he now helped with his project for orphaned youth. The answer came with the clarity of dawn that was beginning to appear on the horizon. It wasn't the answer that the Michael of a year ago would have given, but it was the only one that now made sense. The next morning he called Thomas to communicate his decision. "I'm not coming back," he said simply. "But I have an alternative proposal." He explained his idea. He was willing to advise the board on implementing a real corporate social responsibility program, not as a marketing strategy, but as an ethical commitment. He would work as an external consultant with modest fees, maintaining his independence and his new life. "You're crazy," was Thomas's initial response. "You're turning down millions. I'm choosing something more valuable," Michael responded with a serenity that surprised even himself. When he hung up, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time, as if he had passed a test he didn't even know he was taking, the final test of his transformation. That afternoon, upon returning home, he found Emily in the yard, reading under the small lemon tree they had planted when they moved. Hope slept in her portable crib beside her, her breathing measured, her small fists closed next to her angelic face. "I refused the offer," Michael announced, sitting beside them. Emily closed her book, studying his face. "Are you sure?" Michael nodded, taking her hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Why?" she asked, not because she doubted his decision, but because she wanted to understand the path that had led him to it. Michael looked around him. The small yard with potted plants, the clothes hanging gently swaying in the breeze, his daughter's sleeping face, Emily's hand in his. All so simple, so ordinary in the world's eyes, but for him, more valuable than all the empires he had ever built or dreamed of building. "Because I finally understood that what we have here," he responded, his voice loaded with emotion, "can't be bought with all the money in the world, and I'm not willing to risk it." "Not again," Emily smiled, that smile that had illuminated his life since that first meeting in the broken elevator. She leaned in to kiss him, a kiss that tasted of fulfilled promise, of shared future, of home. His touch still made her heart race. His whisper still carried that intensity that left her breathless. But now when he said, "I can't stop anymore," he was talking about building a life with meaning, not about possessing or conquering. He was talking about how he couldn't stop thanking each morning for having lost everything, because only then had he found what truly mattered. The seasons passed, marking the rhythm of life in Queens. The small lemon tree in the yard had given its first fruits. Hope had spoken her first words, Dada to Michael's delight, water to everyone's surprise, and the modest house had truly become a home. Michael had developed his social project beyond what he initially imagined. What began as informal mechanics workshops for orphaned youth had become a structured professional training program, supported by small local businesses that offered internships and, eventually, employment to the participants. "I never thought I would become a teacher," he commented one night while reviewing his students' work at the kitchen table. Emily observed him over her law books, now in her second year of college. "You've always been good at explaining things. Just that before you explain to executives in expensive suits, not to kids in worn sneakers." Michael smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. The difference is that these kids really want to learn. They're not there out of obligation or ambition, but because they see a real opportunity to change their lives. "Like you," Emily softly added. Their gazes met in a moment of perfect understanding. Michael had traveled a path similar to these youths, from hopeless orphan to man with purpose. The difference was that he had needed to lose everything to find his true path, while he tried to help these kids find it without the painful detours. The proposal Michael had made to Parker Technologies as an external consultant had been accepted, though with modified terms. He attended the offices once a month, always in his simple clothes and with his old leather backpack, to advise on the implementation of social responsibility policies. Some executives looked at him with disdain, others with curiosity, a few with genuine respect. What no one could deny was the positive impact of the initiatives: scholarship programs for students from disadvantaged environments, fair labor policies, investments in communities where the company operated. The strategist Michael was still there, but now he used his talent to balance business benefit with social benefit. Meanwhile, Emily had found her own professional voice. Her work at the foundation had led her to become a respected figure in the field of housing rights defense. She combined this with her studies and motherhood, a balance that sometimes seemed impossible but that somehow she managed to maintain day by day. "Sometimes I wonder what our life would be like if nothing had changed," she commented one afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, Hope running ahead of them chasing pigeons. "If you had continued being the powerful CEO and I the trophy wife." Michael took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers as he had done since that first night. "We would have had more things, but less life." The response, simple but profound, summarized the transformation of both. It wasn't just that Michael had left behind the ruthless corporate world, or that Emily had found her vocation in service to others. It was that together they had discovered a way of living that valued human connections above material possessions, authenticity above appearances, positive impact above power. One day, while Michael worked at the shop, he received an unexpected visit. Victoria Bennett, elegant as always but with a different expression on her face, less hard, less calculating. "Victoria," Michael greeted, cleaning his hands before approaching. "I didn't expect to see you." "Nor did I expect to be here," she admitted, looking around with some discomfort. "I came to say goodbye. I'm moving permanently to Los Angeles." Michael nodded, not quite knowing what to say. The woman before him had been his fiancée, then his fiercest enemy, the architect of his downfall. But now, seeing her under the raw light of the shop, she seemed simply another person, as full of contradictions and searches as anyone. "You look different," Victoria observed. "At peace." "I am," Michael confirmed. "And you?" Victoria looked away. "I'm on the way. Therapy helps. Getting away from New York, too." An uncomfortable silence ensued, loaded with a shared past that already seemed to belong to other people. "I wanted to apologize," Victoria finally said, the words coming out with evident effort. "Not for exposing you, that you deserved, but for how I did it, for the cruelty, for making it personal." Michael looked at her, surprised by the sincerity he perceived. "I accept your apologies, and I offer mine. I treated you like a possession, not like a person. I abandoned you when you needed me most." Victoria smiled slightly, a sad but genuine smile. "It seems we've both learned some lessons. The most important ones are usually the most painful," Michael reflected. Before leaving, Victoria added, "I saw a report about your program for young people. It's admirable. Perhaps the real Michael Parker has finally come to light." That night, Michael shared the encounter with Emily as they dined in the small yard, under colored lights they had hung to give a festive air to the space. "How do you feel about it?" asked Emily, serving a bit more of homemade stew onto Michael's plate. Michael contemplated the question as the aroma of herbs from the small garden mixed with the night breeze. "At peace, I think, as if a circle had closed. For a long time, Victoria represented everything that had gone wrong in my previous life. The excessive ambition, the superficial relationships, the selfish decisions. And now," Emily insisted, observing the changing expressions on her husband's face in the light of the colored bulbs. "Now I see her simply as a person who, like me, was lost in her own way," Michael responded after a moment. "Someone who is also trying to find her path." Emily nodded, understanding the depth of that reflection. Michael's capacity to see humanity, even in those who had harmed him, was perhaps the most notable transformation in him. "Daddy, look!" exclaimed Hope, approaching with a faltering step, holding in her small hands a lemon that had fallen from the tree. Michael lifted her in his arms, kissing her forehead. "What treasure have you found, Princess?" "Lemon," the little one clearly pronounced with that particular pride of children who discover the world word by word. "And what do we do with lemons?" asked Michael, following a habitual game between them. "Lemonade," Hope responded with a bubbling laugh that seemed to illuminate the entire yard. Emily observed them, marveled once more by how the most adverse circumstances had brought with them the most precious gifts. A thought crossed her mind, something her grandmother Rose used to say, "Sometimes life takes away what you thought you needed to give you what you really need." That night, as they put Hope to bed, the little girl asked for her favorite story. Michael sat by the bed, the worn book in his hands, and began to read. His voice, which had once dictated orders to fearful executives, now softened as he narrated adventures of brave animals and enchanted forests. When Hope's breathing became measured, a sign that she had finally fallen asleep, Michael and Emily quietly left the room. In the small living room, under the dim light of a lamp, Emily took an envelope from her purse. "I received this today," she said, extending it to Michael. He opened it curiously. It was a letter from the law school confirming that Emily had been selected for an internship program at a prestigious law firm specializing in labor rights. "Emily, this is wonderful," he exclaimed, embracing her with pride. "I knew you could do it." She smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "It's an incredible opportunity, but they're full days for 3 months. I don't know how we'll manage with Hope, with your work, with everything." Michael took her hands in his. "We'll solve it together, as we've done with everything else. I can adjust my hours at the shop. Your mother will surely help us. The boys from the program can have some sessions here in the yard." The determination in his voice dissipated much of Emily's doubts. This was what she most valued in their current relationship. Not the overwhelming passion of the beginning, but this association of equals. This shared commitment to making things work, to mutually supporting each other in their dreams and ambitions. "Who would have thought you would end up being the one encouraging me to pursue my professional career?" she joked, remembering the Michael of the early days, so focused on his own goals. He smiled with a mixture of nostalgia and shame. Life has a peculiar sense of humor. That night, as they lay together in bed, the sounds of the neighborhood softly filtering through the half-open window, distant conversations, the occasional barking of a dog, the passing of a car, Michael thought about how these everyday noises, which he would once have considered annoying from the isolated height of his penthouse, now formed the comforting soundtrack of his home. "What are you thinking about?" asked Emily, noticing his thoughtfulness. "That I've never felt as rich as I do now," he replied, and although the phrase might have sounded cliched from someone else's lips, from his, it carried the weight of a hard-learned truth. Spring arrived in New York with an explosion of color and life. The neighborhood trees covered themselves with flowers. The small garden in the yard blossomed with promises of tomatoes and bell peppers for summer, and a feeling of renewal permeated the air. Emily adapted to her new routine at the internship with the same determination she had shown before each challenge in her life. The law firm, located in an elegant office building on Madison Avenue, ironically not far from Michael's old penthouse, represented a new world for her, full of legal jargon, strategic meetings, and complex cases. "It's strange," she commented one night during dinner. "Some of the senior lawyers worked for companies like yours, defending corporate interests against workers. Now I'm learning their tactics to use them on the opposite side of the battlefield." Michael smiled. "The best defense is knowing your adversary. No one better than a former smoker to design anti-tobacco campaigns." Hope, now almost 2, had become a chatty and curious little girl who wandered around the house pointing at objects and demanding to know their names. Her emerging personality showed Michael's determination, combined with Emily's empathy and creative sensitivity, a mixture that promised both moments of joy and challenges in the future. Michael's social project had caught the attention of an educational foundation that offered funding to expand it to other neighborhoods. The proposal included a modest but stable salary for him as the program's director, which meant leaving the auto repair shop. "I don't know, Emily." He hesitated while reviewing the terms at the kitchen table one night. "I like the shop. There's something honest in fixing tangible things, in seeing immediate results." Emily observed him, recognizing once more how much that man had changed, who once had valued his work solely for the power and status it conferred. "The shop will always be there if you want to go back. But this program, it's something you created from scratch, something that can really change lives." Michael nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the papers spread across the table. "I suppose what worries me is moving too far from the everyday, from the real, becoming another manager, removed from the fieldwork." "Then don't allow it," Emily responded with simplicity. "Establish from the beginning that you'll continue teaching, that you'll continue getting your hands dirty. Define the job on your own terms." The clarity of her perspective, as so many other times, illuminated the path for Michael. He called the foundation the next day and negotiated an agreement that would allow him to maintain direct contact with the youths while expanding the program's reach. One May afternoon, while Michael was working in the yard with a group of teenagers, teaching them the fundamentals of basic electronics, he received a surprise visit. Frank, the owner of the shop where he had worked, appeared with a grave expression. "I need to talk to you," he said, pulling Michael away from the group. The news was shocking. The shop was facing serious financial problems due to accumulated debts that Frank had hidden from everyone. Bankruptcy was imminent, and with it, the dismissal of the 5 mechanics who worked there, all with families to support. "I've tried everything," Frank explained, the shame evident on his weathered face. "But the numbers don't add up. In 2 months I'll have to close." Michael felt the familiar weight of an important decision on his shoulders. He could simply offer advice, perhaps help the employees find new jobs. It would be reasonable, prudent. But as he observed the youths in the yard, absorbed in their task, an idea began to form in his mind. A bold, risky, but potentially transformative idea. That night, he presented his plan to Emily, to use part of the foundation's money, combined with some personal savings, to acquire the bankrupt shop and convert it into a professional training center with real service to clients. The mechanics would keep their jobs, the youths in the program would have a space for real practice, and the profits, if they came, would be reinvested in the program. "It's risky," warned Emily, always the voice of prudence. "If it fails, we could lose the savings that cost us so much to accumulate." "I know," Michael admitted, "but something tells me it's the right path. It's not ambition or nostalgia for running a business, I want to create something that combines the best of my two worlds, my capacity for business and my commitment to helping others." Emily studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or the old hunger for power. She found none. In their place, she saw genuine conviction, and that special spark that appeared when Michael talked about the youths in the program. "You know what my grandmother told me once?" she commented, intertwining her fingers with his. "Sometimes you have to risk something good to get something better. If you believe in this, so do I." The following weeks were frantic. Michael negotiated with Frank, consulted lawyers, met with the foundation to present the idea and secure their support. The plan gradually took shape. The shop would be converted into Second Chance, a center where experienced mechanics would work alongside youths in training, offering professional service at competitive prices. The most surprising thing was the reaction of Michael's old contacts in the business world. Upon learning of the project, several offered support, discounts on supplies, maintenance contracts for corporate fleets, even a space in the New York Chamber of Commerce magazine. "It's curious," Michael reflected one night, while reviewing the business plan at the living room table, with Hope already asleep. "When I ran Parker Technologies, I measured each relationship by its strategic utility. Now that I can't offer them anything in return, some of these contacts are genuinely helping me." "Perhaps they always saw something in you that you yourself didn't recognize," suggested Emily. "Or perhaps you're simply reaping what you sowed when you decided to do the right thing, even at the cost of your fortune." The day of the inauguration of Second Chance dawned bright and warm. The old shop, now renovated with training zones separated from work areas, displayed a simple but elegant logo designed by Kate, Emily's sister, now a graphic design student. Emily's entire family was present. Susan had prepared a huge pot of chili for all the attendees. Uncle Robert played guitar in a corner. The mechanics, initially skeptical about the new business model, now showed cautious optimism, seeing the improved facilities and the already confirmed client portfolio. The most moving thing for Michael was the presence of 5 of his former students from the program, now officially hired as apprentices. Seeing them with their new uniforms, proud and nervous in equal parts, confirmed to him that he had made the right decision. The small inauguration ceremony was simple but emotional. Michael, not one for speeches, limited himself to thanking everyone who had made the project possible. When he mentioned Emily as the lighthouse that guides me when I lose my way, tears came to the eyes of many present. After cutting the symbolic ribbon, and while the guests enjoyed the food in the shop's outer courtyard, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he found himself face to face with Steve Davis, the former employee of NJ Textiles, who had visited him months earlier. "I came to see if it was true what they were saying," commented Steve, observing the festive environment around him. The great Michael Parker turned into a mentor for troubled kids and savior of bankrupt shops. Michael detected the slightly mocking tone, but also an underlying respect that hadn't been present in their last encounter. "I'm not a savior of anything," he responded with humility. "I'm just trying to put my skills at the service of something worthwhile." Steve nodded slowly. "My oldest son needs work," he said after a moment. "He just finished vocational training in electromechanics. He's a good kid, hard-working." Michael understood the significance of that gesture. Steve Davis, the man he had harmed years ago, now trusted him to give his son an opportunity. It was more than a job offer. It was an act of reconciliation. "Tell him to come on Monday," he responded, extending his hand. "There's always space for people who want to learn and work." As they shook hands, Michael felt another circle closing in his life, another bridge being rebuilt over the ruins of his past. That night, after putting Hope to bed, Michael and Emily went out to the small yard of their house. New York's starry sky stretched above them, the same city that had witnessed their first encounter, their fall, and now their rebirth. "Are you happy?" asked Emily, leaning against him on the lounger they shared. Michael reflected on the question, not with the superficiality with which he would have answered years ago, but with the depth of someone who has learned the true meaning of the word. "I'm more than happy," he finally responded. "I'm at peace with my past, with who I am now, with what we build each day. And that's a much greater gift than the momentary happiness I used to chase." Emily smiled, perfectly understanding what he meant. In silence, they contemplated the night sky together, aware that each visible star represented light that had traveled years to reach them, like their own path, long, sometimes dark, but finally luminous. Autumn painted New York with ochres and golds. Hope, now almost 3, ran among the fallen leaves in the small park near home, laughing each time they crunched under her feet. Michael observed her from a bench, marveling at how each small discovery, a particularly red leaf, a fallen pine cone, a snail slowly sliding along, provoked in her such genuine joy. "Daddy, look!" she constantly exclaimed, turning the routine walk into an expedition of wonders. Second Chance had exceeded all expectations. What began as a rescue project had become a social business model that attracted visits from entrepreneurs and educators interested in replicating it. Michael had found a balance that previously seemed impossible to him, managing a successful business without sacrificing his principles or the social mission of the project. Steve Davis's son, Matt, had turned out to be an exceptionally talented mechanic who now supervised the younger apprentices. Some days, observing the shop in full activity, experienced mechanics working alongside youths who just months before had no direction in life, Michael felt a satisfaction that no economic benefit could equal. Emily, meanwhile, had completed her internship with such distinction that the law firm offered her a part-time position, allowing her to continue her studies. Her emerging specialty was cases of companies in crisis and how to restructure them while protecting workers' rights, an area where her family's personal experience contributed a unique dimension to her legal approach. "It's strange," she commented one night while they dined with Susan and Grandmother Rose, who had come to visit from Georgia. "Before I saw the business world as the natural enemy of working families. Now I understand that the problem isn't the companies themselves, but how they're managed, what values guide them." Grandmother Rose, at 85 but with enviable lucidity, nodded wisely. "Money is like water, child. It can give life if it flows and is shared, or it can drown you if you only think about accumulating it." Michael smiled at the simple but profound analogy. How much his relationship with money and success had changed. Now Second Chance generated modest but constant profits, sufficient to guarantee its sustainability and allow him and Emily to live comfortably, though without excessive luxuries. The difference was that these profits weren't the objective, but the means to sustain something with purpose. One November morning, while Michael was reviewing invoices in the small office of the shop, he received an unexpected call. It was Thomas Harris, his former financial director at Parker Technologies. "Michael, I need to see you." The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. "It's about the company. Things aren't going well." They met that same afternoon at a discreet coffee shop near Times Square. Thomas had aged prematurely since the last time Michael had seen him. The wrinkles on his forehead, the pronounced dark circles, spoke of constant worries and sleepless nights. "The company is on the verge of collapse," he explained without preamble. "After your departure, we tried to maintain the course, but the new management's decisions have been disastrous. Too rapid expansion, speculative investments, cuts in critical areas." Michael listened attentively, feeling a contradictory mixture of emotions: sadness for the company he had once built, concern for the employees whose lives depended on it, but also a healthy detachment that allowed him to see the situation with clarity. "Why are you telling me this?" he finally asked. "I left that world behind long ago, Thomas." The older man sighed heavily. "The board wants you back. Not as an employee, but as a strategic consultant for the restructuring plan. No one knows the company like you. No one has your vision." Michael felt the weight of hundreds of lives on his shoulders. Not just the executives and managers, but the technicians, the administrative staff, the cleaning and security personnel, all those anonymous faces he had overlooked during his many years at the head of the company. "I need to think," he finally responded. "Talk with my family." That night, while Hope slept, Michael and Emily talked at length about the proposal in the intimacy of their bedroom. The dim light of the lamp projected dancing shadows on the walls, while Michael laid out the pros and cons, the implications for second chance for their family life. "It's not like the last time they offered you to return," Emily observed. "They're not asking you to abandon what you've built, but to share your experience to prevent hundreds of people from losing their jobs." Michael nodded, recognizing the crucial difference. "Still, I worry about submerging myself in that environment again, even temporarily. The power, the adrenaline of big decisions, I know how seductive it can be." Emily took his face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes. "The Michael I met in that penthouse could lose himself again in that world, but the man you are now, I trust him. I trust that you'll know where the limit is when it's time to come home." Emily's trust, earned through years of joint transformation, was the decisive factor. The next day, Michael called Thomas to establish his conditions. He would work as an independent consultant 3 days a week for 3 months, time enough to design and initiate a restructuring plan. He wouldn't participate in decisions that involved mass layoffs, and his name wouldn't publicly appear associated with the process. The first weeks were surreal. Returning to the corporate offices of Parker Technologies with their marble floors and panoramic views was like visiting a museum of his previous life. Some veteran employees looked at him with astonishment, others with wariness, most with curiosity. How was it possible that the legendary Michael Parker, whose fall had been so spectacular, now returned wearing simple clothes and without the arrogance that had once characterized him? The most revealing thing for Michael was discovering that he could apply his strategic talent without sacrificing his principles. The plan he developed prioritized long-term sustainability over immediate profits, the protection of essential jobs over indiscriminate cuts, ethical innovation over aggressive tactics. "It's brilliant," Thomas acknowledged after reviewing the complete proposal. "It will save the company without destroying its soul, but the board, some members were expecting something more drastic." "If they want my advice, this is the way," Michael responded with serenity. "If they prefer another approach, they're free to seek another consultant." To his surprise, the board approved the plan almost in its entirety, not out of kindness or principles, but because they recognized the strategic vision that had once made Michael Parker a legend in New York business. One afternoon, while Michael was gathering his things after a long meeting, a young assistant timidly approached his desk. "Mr. Parker," she began, visibly nervous, "I just wanted to say that my brother is in your second chance program. He had had problems with drugs, dropped out of school. We thought we had lost him, but since he entered the shop, he's a different person. He has purpose, feels valued." Michael looked at her, moved by the sincerity in her face. "What's your brother's name?" "David." "David Wilson." Michael smiled, immediately remembering the boy. Quiet at the beginning, distrustful, but with a natural talent for electronics that was gradually flourishing. "David has potential," he responded with sincerity. "He just needed someone to believe in him." The young woman nodded, holding back tears. "That's what he says about you. That for the first time someone sees him for what he can become, not for the mistakes he's made." That night, while Michael returned home on the subway, he had categorically refused the offer of a corporate car. He reflected on the conversation. In his previous life, he would have considered the social program as an image strategy, accounting for its return in terms of positive publicity. Now he understood that the true value was in each individual life transformed, in each potential unlocked. Upon arriving home, he found Emily and Hope waiting for him with a surprise. They had prepared together for the first time an apple pie. The result was irregular, with burnt edges and a somewhat raw center, but the expression of pride on his daughter's face as she held the plate made it the most precious delicacy in the world. "I made it, Daddy," proclaimed Hope, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "It's the most beautiful pie I've ever seen," responded Michael, kneeling to embrace her. As they dined, he shared the conversation about David and how it had impacted him. Emily listened attentively, recognizing in his words the culmination of a long interior journey. "You know what my labor law professor told me today," she commented afterward, "that the true business revolutions won't come from new technologies, but from new models that put people at the center, like what you did with Second Chance." Michael shook his head, always uncomfortable with direct praise. "I didn't invent anything new. I just applied what I learned in the hardest way possible. that empty success is the worst form of failure. That night, as Emily slept beside him, Michael contemplated the ceiling of the bedroom, thinking about the contrast between his current life and his previous one. He recalled the nights of insomnia in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by all material comforts, but haunted by an inner emptiness that no acquisition could fill. Now in this modest house, with his daughter's laughter still resonating in his ears and the warmth of Emily next to him, that emptiness had been replaced by a fullness he never believed possible. True wealth, he murmured to himself, isn't what you have, but what you don't need to be happy. With that thought, he closed his eyes and surrendered to a deep and restorative sleep, the sleep of a man who had finally found his place in the world. 5 years had passed since that first encounter in the broken elevator. Manhattan unfolded under an exceptionally clear summer sky, the pollution reduced by a recent environmental regulation that limited traffic in the center. Fifth Avenue, the city's main artery, bustled with activity as always, but with more bicycles and fewer cars, more green spaces and less congestion. Among the corporate buildings rose the tower that had once housed the central offices of Parker Technologies, now renamed and partially converted into a social innovation center where purposeful emerging companies shared space and ideas. On the top floor, where Michael's presidential office had once been located, a special event was being celebrated. Second Chance was turning 4, and what began as a small shop in the Bronx had transformed into a network of 5 centers distributed throughout New York, all following the same model: experienced mechanics working alongside youth at risk of exclusion, offering professional services that financed the social mission. The terrace was decorated with simplicity but elegance. Hanging lights illuminated the space now that the sun was beginning to set, tinting the New York sky pink and gold. In a corner, Hope, now 7, played with other children under the watchful eye of Grandmother Susan. Michael, dressed in a simple white shirt and dark pants, conversed with various guests. Former students of the program, now converted into qualified technicians, businessmen interested in replicating the model in other cities, representatives of educational foundations. Emily recently graduated in law and a junior partner in a firm specialized in social economy, moved with equal ease among the diverse groups. At one point in the party, Michael discreetly withdrew to a corner of the terrace, observing the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and amazement. How was it possible that he was there in the same building where he had once ruled with an iron hand, celebrating something completely opposite to the values he had then defended? Thoughtful as always, Emily's voice pulled him from his reflections. She had approached silently, bringing 2 flutes of champagne, the same they had tasted together that first night. Michael smiled, accepting the flute. "I was thinking about circles, about how life sometimes brings us back to the same place, but as completely different people." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding what he was referring to. In these years, she had learned to read Michael like an open book, to recognize the nuances of his thoughts in small gestures, in fleeting glances. "Look," she pointed to a spot on the terrace where Matt Davis, Steve's son, was animatedly explaining something to a group of social investors. "Who would have imagined that the son of a worker you harmed would now be the technical director of your most significant project?" "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," responded Michael, repeating a phrase that had become almost a mantra between them. A waiter passed offering appetizers. Michael immediately recognized the aroma: homemade mini sandwiches, the same simple snack that Emily had carried in a container that day in the elevator. He took one, savoring it with closed eyes, allowing the flavor to transport him to that initial moment, to that first crossing of paths. "It was your mother's idea," explained Emily, upon seeing his expression. "She said it was important to always remember where we came from, no matter where we are now." The wisdom of Susan Wilson, simple but profound, was one of the pillars upon which they had built their life together. Michael had learned more from that self-taught seamstress than from all the business gurus he had consulted in his previous incarnation. In the distance, Hope ran toward them, her blue dress floating like wings, her curls, so similar to Emily's, dancing with the movement. At 7, she was a perfect mixture of both, Michael's determination and analytical intelligence combined with Emily's empathy and creative sensitivity. "Daddy, Mummy!" Uncle Robert is going to play guitar and Grandma Rose wants to dance. Come." The girl's spontaneity contrasted with the formality of the event, but no one seemed bothered. On the contrary, the announcement provoked anticipatory smiles among the guests. The fusion of worlds, the corporate and the familiar, the professional and the personal, that had once seemed impossible to Michael, now flowed naturally. They followed Hope to the center of the terrace, where Uncle Robert, now with completely white hair but the same energy as always, was tuning his guitar. Grandmother Rose, almost 90 years old but with an indomitable spirit, waited at his side, her wrinkled but expressive hands already marking the rhythm. Michael observed the scene when he noticed a presence at his side. It was Thomas Harris, his former financial director, now retired, but still linked to Parker Technologies as an advisor. "I never thought I would see something like this in this building," commented the older man, indicating with a gesture the improvised jazz stage that was forming. "Music, joy, authenticity. We used to have strategic meetings here, remember? Cold, calculated, centered solely on the numbers." Michael nodded. "Different times, different priorities. Different people," added Thomas, looking at him significantly. "You're unrecognizable, Michael, and I say that as the greatest of compliments." Before Michael could respond, the first notes of the guitar filled the air. Rose, defying her age, began to dance with a grace that drew spontaneous applause. Susan joined her, and soon Hope was also trying to imitate the movements with more enthusiasm than precision. "Mommy, you too!" exclaimed the girl, extending her hand toward Emily. With a smile, Emily joined the improvised circle of dancers, her movements natural and fluid, as if the southern blood of previous generations ran through her veins, dictating each gesture. Michael observed her enchanted, as beautiful now as that first night, but with a confidence and serenity that only years and shared experiences could bestow. Her simple but elegant dress moved with each turn, her eyes shone with the light of the New York dusk, and in each of her gestures Michael could read a story, a memory, a moment lived together. "You should join," suggested Thomas with a smile. Michael shook his head. "I have 2 left feet, I prefer to observe." And it was true. In that moment, nothing gave him more happiness than being a witness to his family's joy, to the culmination of an improbable path that had transformed not only his life, but that of so many people around. When the music reached its climax, Hope ran to him, pulling his hand. "Daddy, come, Grandma says even you can learn to dance." The laughter around him was warm, inviting. Michael, who had once governed that same space with calculating coldness, allowed himself to be guided by his daughter to the center of the terrace, where Emily received him with a smile that still, after so many years, made his heart race. "I don't know how to dance," he protested weakly, aware of the amused looks around him. "It's not about knowing," Emily responded, placing one hand on his shoulder and taking the other in hers. "It's about feeling, about letting yourself go." And so, under the increasingly starry sky of New York, with the city stretching at their feet like a sea of lights, so similar to that first night in the penthouse, but so fundamentally different, Michael Parker took his first dance steps. Awkward at first, unsure as his path to redemption had been, then more fluid, guided by Emily, supported by the smiles and applause of those surrounding them. And finally, almost natural, as if he had always carried this capacity within him, waiting only for the right moment and the right person to manifest. As they turned together, Michael thought about all the turns his life had taken, about how the broken elevator that united them had been just the first of so many seemingly accidental moments that, viewed in retrospect, formed a perfectly designed path to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" asked Emily, reading as always the introspection in his eyes. Michael smiled, leaning to speak in her ear while they continued moving to the rhythm of the music. That night, when I whispered, "I can't stop anymore," I had no idea how true it was. I can't stop loving you, trying to be better, thanking each day for having found you. Emily returned his smile, her bright eyes reflecting the lights of New York. "Then never stop." "I won't," promised Michael, and sealed that promise with a kiss that contained everything, the past with its errors and learnings, the present with its imperfect but authentic fullness, the future with its infinite possibilities. Around him, the family, the friends, the youths whose lives had changed thanks to Second Chance, all applauded and celebrated, not just the anniversary of a project, but the complete transformation of a man who had had the courage to lose everything to find what truly mattered. As the night advanced and the celebration continued, Michael thought about how the true transformation had never been about renouncing material wealth, but about completely redefining what it meant to be rich. It wasn't about possessing less, but about valuing more what was really important: Emily's unconditional love, Hope's crystalline laughter, the simple wisdom of Susan and Rose, the loyalty of true friends, the purpose of creating a positive impact in the lives of others. And in that thought, the circle was completed. The man who had once built an empire based on ambition now found his true purpose in simplicity and authenticity. The orphaned boy who swore he would never be vulnerable again discovered that true strength was precisely in opening up, in risking to love, in allowing himself to be fully human, with all the imperfections and marvels that entailed. New York stretched below them, the same city that had been witness to their encounter, their fall, and their redemption. Its lights seemed to whisper stories of thousands of intertwined lives, reminding them that each person who passed through its streets carried within them the possibility of transformation, the capacity to reinvent themselves, the opportunity to find, like them, a love that would change everything. And as Michael held Emily in his arms, with hope dancing around them, he knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't change a single moment of his path, not even the most painful ones, because each step, each decision, each error, and each success had led him exactly where he should be. Here, now, home. Thank you, he whispered against Emily's hair, a simple word that contained universes of meaning. She didn't need to ask why. After so many years together, some things didn't need explanation. She simply rested her head on Michael's shoulder and responded, "Always." And in that single word was everything: a healed past, a full present, a promising future. The story of two imperfect people who, against all odds, had built something beautiful on the ruins of what they once were, demonstrating that true redemption isn't in erasing the errors of the past, but in transforming them into the foundations of a better life. The white lace dress that trembled that first night had long been stored away, but the trembling that Emily felt then, when contemplating an uncertain future with Michael, had transformed into an unshakable certainty that some love stories aren't perfect, but they are perfectly real. And that sometimes, when Manhattan lights up under a starry sky, the magic isn't in the city lights, but in the hearts that beat in unison, celebrating the everyday miracle of loving one day more, a little better, with a little more wisdom and gratitude